June 5, 1944, North Witham Airfield, England, the pathfinders, chalk numbers scratched into olive-drab fuselages as the paratroopers moved out, heading for the waiting Douglas C-47s. Captain Frank Lillyman checked his watch, 2,150 hours, first stick, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment ready to board, 18 guys about to jump 30 minutes ahead of 13,000 other paratroopers, marking the drop zones with lights and radio beacons deep inside occupied France. Up in the cockpit, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Crouch gripped the control yoke of his C-47. Engines thundered awake. 3 planes would take off, 5 minutes apart, each carrying Pathfinder teams to preset coordinates behind Hitler's so-called Atlantic Wall. None of them could know what this night would set in motion. A massive airborne assault, the biggest ever, aimed at smashing German defenses by unleashing chaos, not careful precision. The Germans had turned the Normandy countryside into a fortress. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's whole strategy relied on fast counterattacks. He kept his mobile reserves tucked back behind the coastal defenses. Cut off those response routes and whole sections of the defense would crumble. The Wehrmacht's 91st Air Landing Division and the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment held key ground across the Carentan Peninsula. 7,000 German troops in control of bridges, causeways, and crossroads that linked Utah Beach to the rest of France. General Wilhelm Falle ran the show from his headquarters at Chateau de Berneville, ready to move fast if the Allies landed. The Skytrain lifted off into the English night, cruising at 140 MEPs, weighing in at almost 27,000 pounds, fully loaded. Crouch led plane number 1 out of 8 and 22 C-47s that would carry the 82nd and 101st Airborne into Nazi-occupied France. His plane carried 18 Pathfinders and their gear, Eureka radar beacons to send signals to approaching aircraft, holophane lights laid out in T shapes, visible from 2,000 feet up. The math wasn't forgiving. Drop zones were 1,000 yards by 600. Pilots had 15 seconds at 120 MEPs to spot the zone and flip the green light. A 5-degree navigation slip would scatter paratroopers for miles. At Greenham Common Airfield, Major General Maxwell Taylor stood in front of his officers. West Point, class of 22, already fought in Sicily and Italy. Taylor knew airborne missions worked best when scattered troops acted boldly on their own, not waiting for orders. The 101st had to grab 4 causeway exits connecting Utah Beach to the mainland. Each one crossed flooded fields. Rommel had ordered the flooding to funnel Allied troops into his kill zones. Take those exits, and the 7th Corps could move inland. Fail, and thousands would be trapped and slaughtered on the sand. Onboard C-47 number 4293095, Lieutenant Thomas Mee briefed his 17 men from Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Their job? Seize the wooden bridges at Le Port and secure causeway number 2 by Aerosol 30. Mee had spent 18 months turning civilians into elite paratroopers. But his aircraft would never make it to Drop Zone C. At 23:12 hours, anti-aircraft guns slammed the plane, ripping through the fuselage and sending it crashing into Norman soil near Beuzeville-au-Plain. All 5 crewmen and 17 paratroopers died in the wreck, including Mee and his entire command group. The American Armada crossed the channel in formations called serials, 9 planes, 3 elements of 3, each serial keeping 1,000 feet apart. Every serial had specific drop zones marked by Pathfinder beacons. It all depended on perfect timing and flawless execution, and Normandy wasn't offering anything close to ideal. Clouds at 1,500 feet blocked navigation landmarks. Ground fog dropped visibility to less than a mile. German radar picked up the incoming planes from 50 miles out, warning anti-aircraft gunners across the peninsula. At 00:15 hours on June 6th, Captain Lillyman's Pathfinders jumped over Drop Zone A west of Sainte-Mère-Église. His Eureka beacon fired up within 10 minutes, sending signals to guide the 502nd's main force in. But clouds and enemy fire had already scattered the formation. Only one of the 5 Pathfinder teams landed within a mile of their assigned spot. Staff Sergeant John Ray led 3rd Squad, Company F, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. He was 24 from Glendora, California. Jump wings earned at Fort Benning. Ray's squad trained for this. Night drops, assembling in the dark, using crickets and challenge passwords. Flash, a paratrooper would whisper in the darkness. Thunder, someone called out. A password, a lifeline, a way to tell friend from foe. That's how Americans recognized each other in the dark. The system worked on the hope that scattered soldiers would somehow find one another. Ray's C-47 dropped its load of paratroopers just after midnight, 7 miles off target. He hit water 3 feet deep, and his chute yanked him backward through a flooded field. Mud jammed his emergency release, so he grabbed his jump knife and cut himself loose. Then he wandered the marshes for 4 hours, searching for his squad. When the sun came up, he'd found 3 guys from his own unit and 14 more stray paratroopers from 5 different regiments. They weren't supposed to be together, but in war, you make do with what you've got. By 1:40 a.m., the main waves of transports reached the Cotton Peninsula at 1,900 feet. German flak batteries opened up, 88s and 20mm cannons. Tracer fire, explosions, chaos everywhere. C-47 pilots reacted on instinct, climbing or diving to dodge the bursts. The formation scattered, planes separated by miles instead of yards. Navigators lost sight of their lead ships. Radios stayed silent, orders, so jumpmasters had to guess their location, using the time since they'd crossed the coast instead of any real landmarks. The green jump lights flicked on, not because they'd found the right spot, but because, well, time was up. Out the paratroopers went, hoping for French fields below, not a cold splash in the channel. Private John Steele of Company F, 505th Parachute Infantry, dropped right over Sainte-Mère-Église at 1:15 a.m. The town square was lit up by a burning building, turning the falling paratroopers into perfect targets for German machine guns. Steele's chute snagged on the church steeple, and he dangled 30 feet above the square. For 2 hours he stayed still, pretending to be dead, watching helplessly as German soldiers gunned down his friends. Shrapnel wounded his foot. Eventually, German troops cut him down and took him prisoner, but he didn't stay that way for long. When the 505's 3rd Battalion took the town at 4:30 a.m., Steele escaped. Sainte-Mère-Église, first French town freed on D-Day, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole landed 2 miles off course near Carentan. He ran the 3rd Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry. Cole rounded up 75 paratroopers from all over, then led them through enemy territory toward their objective. At 6:30 a.m., they hit a German strongpoint guarding the Carentan Highway Bridge. 4 concrete bunkers, mortars, machine guns. Normally, you'd need a whole battalion to take a place like that. Cole had rifles, grenades, and 1 bazooka with 3 rockets. He ordered a bayonet charge 250 yards across open ground. They pulled it off, not through planning, but sheer guts. The Germans didn't expect a wild, screaming charge and broke under the shock. Cole's men took the bridge, but it cost them. 29 killed, 43 wounded. Cole earned the Medal of Honor for that, awarded after his death in Holland. 3 months later, General of Artillery. Erich Marx ran the German 84th Corps from his HQ in St. Lo. He'd lost his leg at Stalingrad and knew a thing or two about defense. Marx kept his reserves mobile, ready for Allied landings. At 1:20 a.m., reports flooded in. Paratroopers at Carentan, Sainte-Mère-Église, Montebourg, Pont-l'Abbé, and 20 other spots. The reports made no sense. Was this the real invasion? Diversions? Commandos? Marx had to guess. If he sent his reserves after the scattered paratroopers, he'd have nothing left for the beaches. Hold them back, and the Americans might regroup behind his lines. With no clear answer, he told local commanders to contain the landings and kept his reserves ready to move. It was the right call given what he knew. What he didn't know, the chaos was pure accident. The Americans hadn't planned to scatter, but it confused the Germans so much it worked better than any plan. Technical Sergeant Frank McKee dropped into a walled garden near Turkville at 1:45 a.m. He was the comms sergeant for Headquarters Company 501st Parachute Infantry. McKee carried a SCR 300 radio crucial for battalion coordination. He landed alone, boxed in by 8-foot walls, pitch-dark gunfire echoing everywhere. He tried the radio but got nothing. Without other operators, his codes were useless. For 3 hours, McKee defended his little patch with an M1 Garand, killing 2 Germans who came to check out the noise. At dawn, he linked up with 19 paratroopers at a nearby crossroads. None of them wore his unit's patch. Most of them lost their gear during the jump. McKee ended up in charge almost by accident, just because he had the only working radio. First thing in the morning at 8:30, he got through to division headquarters, gave them his position, and asked what to do next. The orders were blunt: head for Poopville and take out any Germans you run into. So McKee pulled together what men he could, turned them into an improvised platoon, and set off towards the village. On the way, they got into it with German patrols, but managed to capture 32 prisoners. By 11:00, they made it to Poopville and linked up with the troops pushing in from Utah Beach. Suddenly, McKee's radio became the lifeline between the airborne and the guys coming in from the sea. He helped coordinate artillery strikes and get wounded men evacuated. Lieutenant Colonel William Ekman ran the 55th Parachute Infantry's most successful drop. About 3/4 of his men landed within a mile of Drop Zone O near Sainte-Mère-Église. Within 2 hours, under terrible weather and enemy fire, Ekman had gathered 600 men, a small miracle, really. That tight group let them pull off everything they'd planned. 3rd Battalion took Searle just after 4:30 in the morning. 2nd Battalion grabbed the bridge at Lafayette. 1st Battalion blocked the German reinforcements coming from Montebourg, but success came with a price. 600 paratroopers now had to hold a 6-mile line against Germans who outnumbered them 10-1. Ekman set up strong points wherever he could, trusting scattered squads to hold out until help could get through. Up north, Private First Class Leonard Goodgull and 7 others from his squad held a roadblock near Sainte-Mère-Église. At 8 in the morning, German recon vehicles rolled up. The Americans blasted the lead vehicle with a bazooka, sealing off the road. For the next 12 hours, Goodgull's group fought off German attacks while their ammo ran dangerously low. They used captured German machine guns and stripped weapons off enemy dead, anything to keep going. Finally, at 8 that night, Sherman tanks from the 746th Tank Battalion rolled in from Utah Beach. Goodgull had fired over 2,000 rounds, tossed 14 grenades, and helped hold that ground, stopping German armor from reaching Sainte-Mère-Église when it mattered most. The 82nd Airborne's drop zones lay west of the Murderette River in terrain that looked solid from the air but was really a patchwork of hidden marshes. Paratroopers hit water up to their knees or over their heads. Equipment bags, some weighing 140 pounds, dragged men under before they could unbuckle their harnesses. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Shanley, leading the 2nd Battalion of the 508th Parachute Infantry, landed in 4 feet of water at 2:20 a.m. His battalion scattered across 20 square miles of flooded fields. Shanley spent 5 hours rounding up 48 paratroopers from anywhere he could. With that ragtag bunch, he set up a defensive position on Hill 30 west of the Murderay. For 3 days, they held off repeated German attacks, stopping the enemy from flanking the main 82nd positions. They were on their own. No radio contact, no ammo or medical supplies coming in. No way to evacuate the 37 wounded, crammed into a Norman farmhouse that doubled as an aid station. Technician 5th grade, Eugene Darnell was their only medic. He patched wounds with whatever he could find, German bandages, boiled scraps of cloth. When the morphine was gone, all he could do was hold dying men's hands. Brigadier General James Gavin, assistant commander of the 82nd, jumped in with the 58th Regiment at 2:30 a.m. He was just 37, the youngest general in the American Army, promoted after commanding the 505th in Sicily and Italy. Gavin landed in an orchard near Les Forges, rounded up a dozen paratroopers, and started toward the Murderette bridges. Along the way, he picked up scattered men from 6 different battalions until he had almost 300 with him. At Lafayette Bridge, he ran into a real mess. The bridge was the only spot vehicles could cross the Murderay. Germans held the west bank with machine guns and mortars. Americans clung to the east bank but didn't have the heavy weapons to push across. For 2 days, both sides fought over the bridge. Paratroopers charged into machine gun fire. The Germans counterattacked with self-propelled guns. Soon, the water under the bridge was choked with bodies. On June 9th, Gavin personally led the last assault and finally took the bridge. The fight cost 254 American lives, but it opened the way for armor to reach the 82nd's cut-off units west of the Murderette. On the German side, Major General Wilhelm Fahly commanded the 91st Air Landing Division from his headquarters at Château de Bernaville. Fee was a seasoned officer with stints in Poland, France, and Russia under his belt. He knew airborne tactics inside and out, so when he set up his troops, he made sure they were ready for parachute landings. On June 6th, at 4 a.m., Fee was driving back from Rennes, where the German High Command had just wrapped up a war game. His ride took him straight through the drop zones where American paratroopers had landed just hours before. Near Pickville, Lieutenant Malcolm Braun and his patrol from the 58th Regiment threw together a quick roadblock. When they saw Fee's car barreling toward them, they opened up with automatic fire. The car slammed into a wall. Fee didn't stand a chance. He died instantly, the first German general killed on D-Day. Suddenly, the Germans in that sector had no one to pull them together. Their response fell apart, and scattered American paratroopers managed to grab their targets. For the 101st Airborne, taking Causeway 2 meant capturing Pouperville village at its western end. Lieutenant Eugene Dance led the 1st Platoon from Company B, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. At 5 a.m., Dance pulled together 26 paratroopers just outside Pouperville. Inside, about 40 German troops waited in strong defensive positions. Normally, you'd want a whole company and heavy weapons for this kind of job, but Dance had to improvise. He split his platoon into 2 squads and hit the village from both the north and south at once. At 5:30, the attack kicked off. Grenades went flying through windows, and paratroopers stormed building after building, clearing rooms with automatic fire and bayonets. Sergeant Elmer Murray busted open the church door, half expecting German spotters up in the steeple, but instead found 60 French civilians hiding from the chaos. He set guards to keep them safe while his squad kept moving. By 8 a.m., Dance's men had the village locked down, with 18 Germans captured and around 20 killed. Not long after, at 8:15, troops from the 8th Infantry Regiment, fresh off Utah Beach, entered the village. Airborne and seaborne forces had finally linked up. Dance's men, barely at half strength and missing their heavy weapons, had pulled it off and secured the vital causeway exit. Over at St. Martin de Varaville, 4 105mm howitzers threatened Utah Beach. They could have torn landing craft to pieces. The 502nd Regiment's 2nd Battalion got the job of knocking out those guns before the invasion hit the sand. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers, a former West Virginia coal miner turned top-notch soldier, led a scratch team of 15 paratroopers toward the battery at 4:30 a.m. When they got there, the gun pits were empty. The Germans had already moved the howitzers inland, guessing an airborne attack was coming. But the bunkers still bristled with machine guns waiting for the Americans. Summers charged ahead, launching a one-man assault that would go down in airborne legend. He went from bunker to bunker, gunning down 31 German soldiers in 2 hours of non-stop fighting. His Thompson submachine gun got so hot it burned his hands, even through gloves. Private John Steele kept Summers supplied with ammo, braving enemy fire again and again. When Summers' Thompson jammed, Camion handed over his own weapon and grabbed a captured MP-40 to keep the supply line open. By 7 a.m., Summers had cleared 15 bunkers by himself. The surviving Germans ran for Carentan. Exhausted, Summers collapsed. He'd fired more than 700 rounds and thrown 28 grenades during his rampage. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross, though lots of people thought he deserved the Medal of Honor. He survived the war, but the trauma from that morning never really left him. The German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was no pushover. These were elite troops trained to take on airborne assaults. Their commander, Major Friedrich von der Heydte, had jumped into Crete back in 1941, so he knew what to expect from paratroopers. He set up his regiment around Carentan, betting the Allies would go after this key road junction. His plan used mobile counterattack groups backed by mortars and machine guns already zeroed in on likely drop zones. At 2:15 a.m., von der Heydte got word of parachute drops north and east of Carentan. He quickly sent out recon patrols, but kept his main force in reserve, waiting for the right moment to strike. American paratroopers dropped all over the place, scattered across nearly 30 kilometers, no real concentration anywhere. Fonda stared at the map, frustrated. What was he dealing with here? Pathfinders marking targets for a bigger wave? Maybe some lost guys from other missions, or just a distraction? He didn't waste time guessing. Instead, he sent out platoon-sized patrols to find the Americans, keeping the rest of his battalion in reserve. It was a smart move, but it wasn't enough. The scattered paratroopers grouped up much faster than the Germans could hunt them down. By dawn, von Dieter's regiment was taking fire from all directions with no clue how many Americans they faced. The elite Fallschirmjäger found themselves in the kind of chaos they usually tried to create for others. George Koskimaki, a radio man with HQ company of the 101st Airborne, landed way off target about 5 miles from his drop zone, right into an apple orchard at 1:45 a.m. His radio survived the landing, but the antenna snapped. For 2 hours, he dodged German patrols and tried to fix his gear. He finally rigged up an antenna using wire from a busted telephone pole, and by 4 a.m., he managed to reach Division HQ. Suddenly, his little patch of orchard turned into a makeshift command post. Officers started showing up, desperate for news. Koskimaki relayed messages, called in ammo requests, and for the next 6 hours, he was the only dependable link between scattered units, sending out intelligence on German positions. When German mortars zeroed in on his signal at 10 a.m., he picked up everything and moved 5 times, never losing contact. By the end of that first day, he'd logged 147 messages sent, 89 received. He helped turn total confusion into some kind of coordinated action. Easy Company of the 56th Regiment lost its captain, Thomas Meehan, when his plane went down. Suddenly, they had no leader. First Lieutenant Harry Welsh took over, simply because he was the highest-ranking guy left after the drop. Welsh landed 2 miles from Drop Zone C with just 7 men from his platoon. As he moved toward Causeway 2, he picked up more stragglers until he had 43 men from 9 different companies. They barely knew each other. Most had lost their gear in the jump. Welsh had a single map, 2 radios, and that was about it. No heavy weapons. At 5:30 a.m., they spotted Germans defending the approach to the causeway. Outgunned, Welsh led his men in a flanking attack through flooded fields. They waded through chest-deep water for nearly 300 yards, coming at the Germans from a direction no one expected. Surprise did the trick. They killed 12 Germans, captured 23, and locked down the western approach to Causeway 2 for the next 4 hours. They held off counterattacks until reinforcements arrived from Utah Beach. Welsh kept leading Easy Company through Normandy, Holland, and Bastogne, earning a stack of medals along the way. What he did on D-Day set the tone for airborne troops across Europe. Small groups, aggressive moves, and never waiting for perfect orders. The glider assault kicked off at 4 a.m. Waco CG-4A gliders cut loose from their C-47 tow planes just 600 feet up. Each glider crammed with 13 soldiers or their weight in gear, jeeps, anti-tank guns, ammo, medical supplies, all silently dropping into the dark. The landing zones were tiny Norman fields boxed in by ancient hedges and 50-foot trees. Pilots had seconds to spot a field, dodge the obstacles, and crash land at 60 miles per hour. John Lawther, a flight officer, piloted glider number 7 with a surgical team from the 326th Airborne Medical Company. When he saw his target field already wrecked with burning gliders, he yanked the stick, looking for any open space. Ground fire ripped through the glider's skin. Bullets smashed the nose, and Lawther caught one in the shoulder. He slumped over the controls, and his co-pilot, Paul Zavatro, grabbed the stick. Zavatro eyed a field bordered by stone walls, too small, but it was that or nothing. He slipped the glider down, leveled off at 20 feet, and deliberately ground-looped it to kill the speed. They hit at 40 mph, skidded sideways, lost a wing to a hedgerow, and the fuselage split behind the cockpit. Still, the surgical team survived with just minor injuries, and within minutes, they'd set up an aid station that treated 183 wounded paratroopers in the next 24 hours. Colonel Howard "Jumpy" Johnson led the 5001st Parachute Infantry Regiment with a kind of wild energy that made you wonder if he was fearless or just plain reckless. The nickname Jumpy wasn't just about parachuting. He always insisted on going first, fighting right there with his men. Johnson hit Drop Zone D smack on target at 1:30 a.m., but when he looked around, he was almost totally alone. His regiment had scattered over 20 miles of the French countryside. By 3 a.m., he'd scraped together just 150 paratroopers out of the 2,000 he was supposed to have. He didn't wait around. Johnson pressed on toward the La Barquette Locks, a spot that controlled the flooding of the Douve River Valley, something the Germans really depended on to slow down any attack. With his little band, Johnson ran straight into German machine guns and mortars. Instead of hanging back, the colonel led from the front, charging across open ground with bayonets fixed. His men screamed as they went, and the Germans, who expected something more orderly, just weren't ready for that kind of madness. By 5 a.m., La Barquette was theirs, but it cost them 43 dead, 60 wounded, all from a tiny force. Johnson held that position for 2 days, fighting off German counterattacks with nothing but ammo stripped from the fallen, his gutsy style turned what could have been a disaster into a real win. Then there was Private Donald Burgett of Company A, 506th Regiment. He was just 19 from Detroit and had lied about his age to sign up at 17. He landed in a flooded field at 1:17 a.m., his parachute dragging him backward through ice-cold water over his head. Burgett yanked the emergency release and broke free, but his leg bag, stuffed with ammo and food, ripped away. He crawled out with only his rifle, bayonet, and 4 grenades. No food, no extra bullets, just one 8-round clip. Moving toward the sound of naval guns, hoping that meant the coast, Burgett stumbled on another paratrooper, Private Robert Leonard, stuck 20 feet up in a tree, tangled in his chute. German voices drifted closer in the darkness. Burgett didn't hesitate. He scrambled up, cut Leonard loose with his jump knife, and both men hit the ground right as German soldiers entered the field. For 10 long minutes, they lay completely still in the tall grass while Germans searched just a few feet away. Leonard had broken his ankle in the fall, but didn't make a sound. Once the coast was clear, Burgett made a splint out of rifle rods and parachute silk, then half-carried Leonard 2 miles to an aid station in an old farmhouse. Along the way, they killed 3 Germans and picked up weapons and ammo Burgett later used when capturing Causeway 1. Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Cassidy, meanwhile, ran his 1st Battalion of the 52nd Regiment with sharp precision, a stark contrast to Johnson's headlong style. Cassidy landed near Fuquerville at 1:40 a.m. and immediately set up a command post in a ruined farmhouse. Using red lamps and whistles, he gathered 225 paratroopers by 3 a.m. Instead of sticking to the book, he grouped them by whatever weapons they had. If you had a machine gun, you were a machine gunner. Bazooka teams got paired up on the fly. Cassidy's target was the north end of Causeway 4, held by 2 German companies with artillery. He didn't rush straight in. Instead, he pulled off a double envelopment, sending troops around both flanks while staging a fake attack in the middle. The Germans fell for it, focusing on the center and missing the real danger until Cassidy's men hit them from behind. By 6:30, the Americans had taken the position with barely any losses. Cassidy's guys captured 147 prisoners and 4 artillery pieces, which they turned right back on the enemy. Thanks to Cassidy's steady hand, the battalion stayed organized all day, linking up scattered paratroopers into a real fighting unit. The Germans had tried to keep gliders out of the Norman fields by planting RML's asparagus, poles 12 feet high, some wired together, some topped with mines. These forced glider pilots into wild, evasive maneuvers at the last second. Glider number 47 carried Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, who commanded the 3rd Battalion, 55th Regiment. The Waco glider came in at 4:10 a.m., pilot Charles Young wrestling the controls as ground fire snapped cables. Young spotted the poles too late. The left wing smashed into one, spinning the glider around and slamming the nose into the ground. The glider flipped end over end. Vandervoort crashed through the nose section, breaking his leg badly, compound fracture, bone and all. Vandervoort pushed through the pain, his leg broken, splintered to the side of a commandeered motorcycle, and set up his command post anyway. He kept running the battalion for 3 days straight without taking himself off the field. Riding that battered bike, he led his men to capture Searles and then dug in to beat back German counterattacks. No way was he leaving, not even with that injury, and the paratroopers saw it. They fought harder just because he wouldn't give up. On June 7th, when German tanks closed in, Vandervoort didn't hang back. He picked up a bazooka and personally directed teams that took out 6 tanks, all at point-blank range. Then you've got Technical Sergeant Robert Bob Neeland from Tonawanda, New York. 25 years old, one of 4 brothers fighting in the war. Neeland landed right on Drop Zone O with D Company, 505th Regiment, just after 1:30 in the morning. His squad's job was to defend some ground near Neuville-Plier in the dark through hedgerows. Neeland's platoon set up to cover the northern approaches while the main force dealt with German attacks from the south. 2 German companies pushed hard against them that night. The paratroopers fought like hell to hold them off. As the sky started to lighten, Neeland's platoon was under even more pressure. He volunteered to stay behind, with just 2 others covering the retreat toward Esmargles and looking after 28 wounded men and a medic. Neeland manned a machine gun for hours, running low on ammo, just to buy time for the rest to get out. He kept firing until he was killed, dying at his post on June 6th. Because of him, his platoon escaped and linked up with the rest of the battalion. Back home, the news was brutal. His mother learned about Bob's death at the same time she heard that another son, Lieutenant Preston Neeland, had been killed near Utah Beach on June 7th. A third brother, Edward, was missing in Burma. He'd turn up later, alive in a Japanese POW camp. The family's loss led to the sole survivor policy, the reason their brother Frederick was sent home. From the front, Major General Don Pratt, assistant commander of the 101st Airborne, led a glider assault at dawn on D-Day. His glider came in at 4:40 a.m., packed with division staff and crucial comms gear. The landing zone was a mess. Burning vehicles, crashed gliders everywhere. Pilot Emile Natal hunted for a clear spot, but all he saw were obstacles. He aimed for a hedge field, even though there were wires and poles everywhere. The glider hit the ground doing 70 miles an hour, way too fast for that field. Natal slammed on the brakes, metal screeching against stone, but the Waco slammed into a hedgerow at 40 miles an hour. The cockpit crumpled. Pratt died instantly, the highest-ranking Allied officer killed that day. His loss left the 101st scrambling for leadership when they needed it most. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard stepped up and set up division headquarters in a farmhouse near Heisville, all while German shells rained down. The 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment had the worst drop of D-Day. They were supposed to land on Drop Zone T, west of the Murderette River, but ended up scattered across flooded marshes nobody saw on the recon photos. Private Edward Jezioski landed in water over his head at 2:40 a.m., his parachute spread out on the surface, trapping him underneath. He cut himself free but couldn't find daylight through the tangled silk. Running out of air, he crawled along the suspension lines until he finally broke the surface, gasping. Around him, darkness and the desperate sounds of men drowning. He barely kept himself afloat. For 3 hours, Jezioski slogged through the marsh, using his rifle to find solid ground. He pulled 2 paratroopers out of trees, almost drowned along with them, before they all reached safety. By dawn, Jezioski and the survivors had found 11 men from different units, none with working weapons after being soaked. No one really knows how many drowned that night. Some say just a few, others say dozens. Bodies turned up weeks later, unrecognizable after so long in the water. Young men who crossed an ocean just to die in 3 feet of marsh, not from enemy fire, but from bad intel. Captain Ben Schwartzwalder, who once coached football at West Virginia University, led Company G 507th Regiment. He brought his playbook and his drive to the battlefield, using lessons from the field to make the most out of every man and every scrap of equipment. Schwarzer splashed down in waist-deep water just after 2:30 a.m., Right away, he saw how badly his company had scattered. Instead of wandering around blindly in the dark, he pulled out a battered hunting horn, something he always carried for moments like this, and started blasting signals. By 4 a.m., 43 paratroopers had found their way to him. Schwarzer got them organized fast. He split them into fire teams based on whatever weapons they had, then set up interlocking fields of fire around an old Norman farmhouse. At dawn, the Germans came. The paratroopers held their ground, firing in short, controlled bursts. Schwarzer barked out orders. Pick your targets, make every shot count. They saved ammo but hit hard. Throughout June 6th, more and more scattered Americans trickled in. By nightfall, Schwarzer had pulled together 186 men from a dozen different units. He turned them into a makeshift company, one that didn't just survive but went on to capture the Lafayette Bridge Causeway on June 9th. That assault punched open the Western Road for American tanks. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Cannonball Krauss led the 3rd Battalion, 505th Regiment. His job, take Smeagol's. Krauss had a reputation. He'd earned his nickname in Sicily and Italy by always going on the attack no matter the odds. By 3 a.m., he'd collected 97 paratroopers near Smeagol's. The town was crawling with about 100 Germans, but Krauss wasn't about to wait for backup. He split his force into 3 groups and hit the town from different sides at 4:30 a.m., grenades leading the way. The paratroopers went building to building, clearing rooms with automatic weapons and bayonets. They turned the church, where Private Steele's parachute still hung from the steeple, into a strong point. Machine guns set up high. German resistance fell apart in half an hour. Surprised by attacks from every direction, the defenders bolted toward Carentan, ditching weapons and gear. At 5 a.m., Krauss raised the American flag over the town hall. It was the first Allied flag to fly over liberated French territory. Holding Sainte-Mère-Église turned out to be a whole different fight. The Germans hit back at 9 a.m., infantry backed by self-propelled guns. Krauss's battalion was down to a fraction of its strength, stretched thin, defending a huge perimeter. Private William Tucker manned a southern roadblock with just 6 paratroopers. When German armor rolled in at 2 p.m., no anti-tank weapons? Tucker didn't flinch. He grabbed wine bottles, filled them with gasoline from a wrecked German vehicle, and made Molotov cocktails on the spot. When the first assault gun rumbled past, Tucker jumped onto it, pouring burning gas through the open hatches. The crew bailed out as flames roared inside. Tucker knocked out 2 more vehicles before shrapnel from an 88mm shell tore through his left arm at the elbow. Even then, he kept fighting, bracing his rifle against a wall and firing one-handed until tanks from Utah Beach finally broke through at 5 p.m. Tucker's tiny roadblock held off a full battalion for 3 hours, stopping the Germans from retaking Sainte-Mère-Église during those critical afternoon hours. That same day, the German 158th Grenadier Regiment launched the first big counterattack against the American airborne. At 6 a.m., 2 battalions with assault guns pushed out of Montebourg towards Sainte-Mère-Église. General James Gavin saw it coming. He'd placed blocking forces along the likely routes, but with paratroopers scattered everywhere, they could only set up isolated strong points. No solid defensive line. The Germans slipped between these positions, threatening to cut off forward units. Sergeant Otis Sampson held an outpost north of Smeagol's with 10 men and a single machine gun. At 6:30 a.m., 2 German companies swarmed his position. Sampson ordered his men to fall back and covered their retreat himself, laying down fire with the machine gun. He held out alone for 20 minutes, cutting down about 30 Germans before his ammo finally ran out. When the Germans overran his post, they found him dead beside his weapon, surrounded by empty shells and ammo boxes. Sampson's stand bought Gavin just enough time to form a new defensive line. The 158th Regiment reached the outskirts of Sainte-Mère-Église by 8 a.m. and ran straight into Sherman tanks rolling up from Utah Beach. The German attack collapsed under a coordinated tank and infantry counterattack, leaving 450 casualties behind. Supplying these scattered airborne troops took some real creativity. Transport planes tried to drop supplies on June 7th, but with no working radio beacons or marked drop zones, the bundles landed all over the place. Mission Memphis, meant for the 101st Airborne, ended up scattering supplies across 40 square miles of Normandy field. Paratroopers watched their precious supplies, ammo and medical kits drift down into German hands or vanish into flooded fields. They needed every bit, but luck just wasn't on their side. Captain Frank Strabel refused to give up. He rounded up French civilians, grabbed whatever German vehicles they could find, and launched salvage missions. Even then, they only managed to recover less than a third of what had been dropped. German patrols were out there too, and more than once, gunfire broke out as both sides scrambled for the same supply bundles. Everybody knew these drops could decide who lived or died. Out of desperation, paratroopers started getting creative. When their own ammo ran out, they pulled rounds off dead Germans and switched over to enemy weapons. Medical supplies? They'd raid German aid stations, sometimes under fire from the very men who stocked them. Private First Class Joseph Lesnipsky became a legend in his unit. He'd been a factory worker back in Michigan, but here he had a knack for finding whatever they needed. He once hauled in a German field kitchen that kept 60 men fed for 3 days. When American machine gun ammo ran dry, he found a German depot and restocked them. But his biggest score came on June 8th. A German medical supply truck abandoned in a ditch, packed with surgical tools, morphine, bandages, all of it life-saving. Lesnipsky, still wearing German insignia, drove that truck to 3 different aid stations, twice bluffing his way past German checkpoints by pretending he was a prisoner under guard. The cost was brutal. Small, isolated battles raged everywhere across the Carentan Peninsula. The 101st Airborne lost 1,240 men, 182 killed, 557 wounded, 501 missing. Many of the missing had drowned in the flooded fields, their bodies lost for weeks. The 82nd Airborne suffered 1,259 casualties, 156 killed, 347 wounded, 756 missing. But those numbers only counted the ones they could confirm. Hundreds more were missing, scattered in small groups, fighting their own private wars behind enemy lines. Aircraft losses piled up too. 42 C-47s went down, each with a crew of 5 and up to 18 paratroopers on board. Hundreds of gliders crashed on landing, their flimsy wood frames no match for German fire or the rough fields. But here's the thing. None of those grim stats told the full story. 13,000 American paratroopers had thrown 60 miles of German territory into chaos. They'd taken key roads, blown up communications, blocked reinforcements, and left the Germans totally confused about where to send their troops. Eisenhower had warned that casualties could hit 80%. In the end, they lost less than half. It was a hard price, but one they could pay. Most important, the paratroopers did what they'd been sent to do. They kept German reserves off the invasion beaches during those crucial early hours. Lieutenant Colonel Joel Crouch thought about all this as he limped his damaged C-47 back to England, 3 engines still running, 1 prop, feathered, hydraulic fluid leaking everywhere, radio operator dead beside him from a shell that tore through the fuselage. He'd dropped his pathfinders right where they needed to go. But at what cost? The drops had looked like a disaster. Scattered men everywhere, no cohesion. But the chaos turned out to be their secret weapon. German commanders couldn't tell what was real and what was a diversion. They hesitated, paralyzed, unable to mount a coordinated response. Turns out the math of airborne warfare isn't so simple. Sure, accurate drops help, but sometimes scattered troops can do more damage. Small groups popped up behind enemy lines, hit from unexpected directions, and rattled the Germans far more than their numbers should have allowed. Executive Officer Williamson of the USS England might have smiled at the irony. He'd won battles through precision and technology. Airborne troops won here through chaos and guts. Both methods had their place. France's liberations started in darkness, confusion, and fear, young men falling from the sky into God knows what. They trained for neat operations but fought scattered and alone. They aimed for order and found victory in chaos. By dawn on June 7th, survivors managed to regroup. Scattered squads blended into makeshift battalions. Lone strongpoints linked up to form defense lines. Radios crackled to life and command was restored. The airborne units that had vanished overnight pulled themselves together by sheer will. Colonel William Eekman stood in the center of Sainte-Mère-Église that morning, watching tanks from the 4th Infantry Division roll through town, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, the tide had turned. The 505th had done it. They held the first freed French town, even as German counterattacks kept coming. The airborne and beach forces finally joined up. But Ekman couldn't celebrate. His regiment started with 2,560 men. Now he could find fewer than 700. Some were dead, lying in the fields of Normandy. Some were wounded, packed into makeshift aid stations in barns and farmhouses. The rest were missing, scattered among other units or hiding from German patrols. Ekman watched a French woman kneel beside a paratrooper's body. She placed flowers on him and wept, mourning this young American who died to free her home. Scenes like this played out all over the countryside. French families crept out of cellars and found their villages freed, but battered. Their liberators, heroes, yes, but also victims of the same war. Private John Steele made his way back to the church where he'd hung for 2 hours on D-Day morning, his foot still aching from shrapnel, though the wound had closed. That famous dummy paratrooper, the one that would hang from the steeple in his name, wasn't even a thought yet. For now, all he had were memories. Friends who died in the square below. He stepped inside, took off his helmet. Bullet holes riddled the walls. Blood stained the floor, but sunlight poured through shattered windows, dust swirling in the beams like tiny parachutes floating down. Steele dropped into a pew, not out of faith, but because he was just empty, drained, and overwhelmed. He'd survived while so many hadn't. He'd seen the battle from an angle nobody else could claim, hanging up between heaven and earth, while chaos tore the world apart below. That memory never left him. For the rest of his life, it haunted him. A couple of days later, General Eisenhower came to see the 82nd Airborne around Sainte-Mère-Église. He stopped at an aid station where Eugene Darnell, a weary medic, was still working after 72 hours without sleep. "How are you holding up, son?" Eisenhower asked. "Still vertical, General," Darnell said, not even glancing up from the bloody chest he was patching. Eisenhower watched Darnell's hands, shaking with exhaustion, but somehow steady when he touched the wounded. This was the truth of airborne war. Not the posters of elite troops dropping from the clouds, but tired, filthy young men doing whatever the moment demanded. Eisenhower had known what he was asking. He'd written a note accepting full blame if things went wrong, admitting that scattered paratroopers could be wiped out one by one. But instead, those scattered drops caught the Germans off guard and helped make the invasion work. That lesson stuck. Sure, massing troops was still a war principle, but sometimes chaos, used right, was a weapon too. Dropping elite soldiers behind enemy lines could shake things up way beyond their numbers if they pushed hard and acted on their own. By June 10th, both airborne divisions had linked up with the troops pushing in from the beaches. The 101st locked down the southern Carentan Peninsula, guarding the right flank of 7 Corps. The 82nd held the center, keeping vital roads and river crossings open, but the men who jumped in on June 5th weren't the same anymore. They'd faced the worst. Alone at night, outnumbered, never sure where the enemy was. The ones who made it through carried a kind of confidence that would get them through another 11 months of war. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers never bragged about his one-man attack on those German bunkers. When people asked, he just said, "I did what needed doing," but the nightmares that rocked him awake told the real story. Extraordinary courage came with a price, paid in sweat-soaked sheets and memories that wouldn't fade. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole led his battalion through France until a sniper killed him in Holland that September. He got the Medal of Honor for his bayonet charge at Carentan, but no medal could describe the desperation that pushed him that far. He just ran out of options, forward or die. Private Donald Burgett survived, went home to Detroit, worked in the auto plants, and later wrote books about his days as a paratrooper. He told the truth about war, the terror, the thrill, the brotherhood, and the heavy cost young soldiers paid just for being there. Technical Sergeant Frank McKee earned a battlefield commission after D-Day and finished the war as a captain. He never forgot those first lonely hours, hiding alone in a walled garden while the fight raged, unseen, all around him. He learned pretty quickly that war wasn't about grand strategies or famous generals. In the end, it came down to individual soldiers, each of them forced to make split-second choices under impossible pressure. Those 2 airborne divisions would jump again in September 1944, this time for Operation Market Garden, that wild gamble to grab bridges across Holland. Later, they dig in at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, holding on so fiercely that their defense became legend. They jumped the Rhine in March 1945, the last big airborne assault in Europe. But nothing, absolutely nothing, ever matched the chaos and intensity of those June nights over Normandy. 13,000 young Americans dropped into total darkness, not sure if they'd land in a field, a tree, or a hail of bullets. For a few endless seconds, each guy was alone with his fear, hanging from a piece of silk and hoping it would be enough to get him to the ground alive. The drops scattered everyone all over the place, looked like a disaster at first, but that mess confused the Germans so much their commanders froze at the worst possible moment. That hesitation gave American troops time to dig in on the beaches, and those footholds turned into the liberation of Western Europe. After it all, Colonel Joel Crouch retired from the Air Force in 1962, his days as a C-47 pilot long gone. Still, he kept a photo on his desk, his plane on the runway at North Witham, pathfinders climbing aboard for the flight to France. You can see their faces in that picture, young, a little nervous, but ready. They had no clue that within hours they'd be scattered across enemy territory. Crouch used to stare at that photo, remembering the weight on his shoulders the night he flew them in. He delivered those men to their fate, dropping them into the blackness over Normandy. Some died as soon as they hit the ground. Others fought lonely battles that never made it into the history books. A handful became famous. Most just did their job quietly and changed the world. Those paratroopers didn't have overwhelming numbers. They had guts. They proved that airborne troops could work, not in theory, but in blood and sweat. They rewrote military doctrine by showing what was possible when you threw the rulebook out the window. Drive through Sainte-Mère-Église and you'll see the memorial. Bronze plaques with the names of Americans who died to free a French town. There's even a dummy paratrooper dangling from the church steeple, a nod to John Steele, who hung there for 2 hours between life and death. But honestly, the real memorial is the freedom their sacrifice bought. French kids grew up under blue skies, not Nazi banners. American families got to welcome sons home who might have been lost if the landings had failed. The world shifted because 13,000 young men jumped into the unknown from 1,100 feet up. The odds were brutal. Everyone expected 80% casualties. The reality was 50%. Still awful, but it meant a lot of guys made it home and helped build the post-war world. They survived through pure aggression, quick thinking, and a kind of courage you only find when there's no way back. Airborne warfare changed after that. Helicopters, guided missiles, all that. But the core idea that elite troops dropped behind enemy lines can change the course of a war never went away. Chaos, if you know how to use it, becomes a weapon. The legacy of D-Day's jumpers lives on in every paratrooper who's followed. Those golden wings on their chests all trace back to Normandy, to the night when scattered soldiers showed that guts and initiative could outmatch even the best enemy plans. On the morning of June 6, 1944, American paratroopers didn't win with perfect coordination. They won by embracing the chaos. They paid a brutal price for it, but their sacrifice shaped the way wars would be fought for generations. Their parachutes drifted down like seeds of freedom, carrying hope into occupied France. Together, they unleashed a storm that stunned the Germans and opened the way for the greatest invasion in history. Boys who jumped from those C-47s landed as men and changed the fate of nations. In the darkest hours, their courage lit the way forward, one scattered landing at a time.